Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the News Philanthropy Summit and our panel discussion about the documentary film Storm Lake. Storm Lake will be presented on PBS on Independent Lens on November 15th, so if you haven't seen it yet, you can tune in then. But today we are just thrilled to welcome Art Cullen, Pulitzer Prize-winning editor of the Storm Lake Times, Beth Levison, the film's producer, and Kyle Munson from the Western Iowa Journalism Foundation in conversation with Yossi Lichterman to learn more about Storm Lake, Iowa, the paper, the foundation, and the amazing film, which is really quite remarkable. Thanks for joining us, and I'll turn it over to our great panel now.
Thanks so much, Annie and Beth and Art and Kyle. We're so thrilled you're with us this afternoon. We were able to screen the film as part of the summit, and it's still live through the end of the night. So if you haven't watched it, there's still a chance to do so tonight, and we can send around the link again. And we hope this is really a conversation. So please feel free to drop questions and comments in the chat throughout, or raise your hand on Zoom, and we'll call on you and invite you to join the conversation. But Beth, I was hoping we could start with you, and I was hoping you could tell us a bit about the thinking behind the film and how you got interested in Storm Lake, the Storm Lake Times, and local journalism.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Yossi, for having us here, and to LenFest. It's really an honor. And I can say that when we were making the film, like, I really wanted to work with the LenFest Institute. And then once we'd released the film, I wanted to, so that it's actually happening is sort of a dream come true. And my big joke is that when, I think Jim Friedlich, if I said it correctly, he retweeted one of my tweets, and I was like, oh my God. I was very happy. Anyway, all to say, going back. So basically, I teach at the School for Visual Arts. I teach producing, and I have a colleague there by the name of Jerry Rishis, and Jerry teaches cinematography. And Jerry reached out to me in 2017 about a film idea about a local newspaper. It had recently won the Pulitzer, and he thought, maybe is there a film here? And admittedly at the time I wasn't able to take the project on, but in 2018 I did read Art's editorial in the New York Times entitled "In My Town We Need Immigrants." In this moment there was just so much divisive talk and journalism about immigrants in this country. There was such toxicity around the conversation. And I just found everything that was happening in media and in politics at the time kind of abhorrent. And I just thought this voice was sort of puncturing with great clarity and wisdom through the noise. And so I circled back to Jerry and said, hey, wait a minute, I think there's something here. And Jerry and I talked. Jerry is from Northwest Iowa, born and bred on a hog farm in a town called Buffalo Center. And so we just started talking and got really lucky that we were able to raise money pretty quickly to get the project off the ground. And I guess what I would say is that, in the beginning, we thought this was a film about art. As we continued to film, we realized that this is a film about a newspaper and a family, and it's really about all of them together and the work that they do, even over more time. Art has this phrase that I think it's yours, Art, that a community is only as strong as its newspaper, and its newspaper is only as strong as its community. And once we started to really understand that, then we realized it's also really about Storm Lake, this incredible place. And I think the last piece was that once we also started to understand that local journalism is about a functioning democracy, good, local, fact-based, credible journalism is part and parcel of a functioning democracy. I think then the film, it just became almost, we were just so committed to it. It became almost more of a cause. And for me, it certainly became my form of activism, during such, a problematic political and journalistic environment and time. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that kind of, that's sort of the genesis of the project and how it evolved for us.
Yes, it absolutely does answer the question. And one of the things that I found so striking about it is that connection between the paper and the staff and the town and the community really comes through. And I think at one point, Art, you referred to the newspaper as really being part of the fabric, and local journalism part of the fabric of the community. And it's everything from, yes, going to cover city council, but births and weddings and just the everyday goings on in the town. And would love to hear you describe that more and how you see the role of the paper in the town.
Well, yeah, I think, the movie, portrays, I think, the ways that the newspaper binds communities together, especially, like Tom Lane, who runs for the Alta City Council to protect his trailer park where he lives. He learns about this council vacancy by reading the Storm Lake Times. And, there's the link right there between, civic engagement and journalism, and which I think is really the essence of the movie. And I think the movie itself is pretty much a work of journalism in the way it accurately portrays what we're up to. But yeah, and it's very important to know that this guy who's working at Tyson is on a Latino talent show. It's interesting, and it also says, here, this guy, this immigrant is a normal person. You have nothing to fear. He just wants to sing, And so the newspaper does that. It takes the rough edges off this otherwise coarse civic conversation, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, oh, go ahead, Beth. I'm sorry.
Well, if I could just add, it's really interesting. Jerry and I are actually on C-SPAN on Sunday, and the journalist, the woman interviewing us, was asking us, like, how did you address these big themes? And can you talk to the public about how you did that? Immigration, climate change, the big ag. How did you talk about that? And I said, well, we just really followed the newspaper. We did it how the newspaper does it, which is through telling these human stories, and I think that was such an opportunity that we had with this film, that we could, that these massive national themes kind of were unfolding on a very intimate and human level. And so that's what I said to the person, we did it through their work, their stories, and they're humanizing these themes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think when they're humanized, it's not nationalized Democrats versus Republicans, us versus them. It's things that are happening to your neighbors and other people in the community, and can cut through some of that noise that happens on the national level.
Yeah, we hope so.
And I don't think I'm spoiling anything when it comes to the end of the film, but one of the things at the end is the launch of the Western Iowa Journalism Foundation as a way to support the paper and to support more broadly local journalism in the community. And Kyle, I was hoping you might be able to give us an overview of that and of the foundation and more about its origin.
Yeah, thanks. Well, the foundation began as a conversation among Art and other publishers and editors in Western Iowa, Doug Burns and others. They're always trying to be innovative and striving, for ways to survive in this day and age. And increasingly, they started talking about the idea of this foundation, and that broadened the conversation to people like me. I spent 24 years as a journalist in daily news, but had stepped out of the industry, but was still very much invested in it. And so I became part of a board. I became president of the board in 2020 when the organization came together. And that led to a lot of work with our executive director, Becky Benami, and we got IRS approval at the start of this year. So we moved very fast to try to address this crisis that we're talking about here in all the conversations this week. So but we're a little bit unique too. There are a lot of, obviously, everybody here knows this, a lot of these experiments going on with how do we fund news for the future. And so this is an organization that is doing that, but it's focused on a regional approach in arguably one of the toughest regions to do that in rural America, in small towns, lots of news deserts to deal with. But we want to, the intent is we need to preserve these independent and family-owned news organizations, these newsrooms like Art's, that are serving their communities. You know, they're not serving some other sector of the audience, a partisan audience or anything else. They're serving a local community. And so by taking pieces from others around the country that have started to tackle the problem, whether, you know, say investigative reporting in Seattle or other places, we're able to transfer some of those to this regional approach and say we can be a nonprofit entity to help sustain and help these for-profit newsrooms thrive again through a lot of different ways.
That's terrific. And I think one of the really interesting things is also the distinction that whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, it's still local journalism with a community-driven mission that is still worthy of support, regardless of the tax status. And so finding ways to be able to continue that support and enable those philanthropic donations.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have, no matter your funding model, you need a clear mission and you need transparency and you need to be have a duty to your audience, to your readers. And that can happen for-profit or nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. It seems like Art, with the times, there has been a willingness to try and experiment with the business model and different ways to generate revenue, recognizing that the traditional model isn't going to cut it necessarily anymore. And so I know in the documentary, there's the GoFundMe that you guys launched at the beginning of COVID and also a partnership with La Prensa, the Spanish language newspaper in the area. Can you tell us a bit about how you're thinking about new revenue ideas and innovating on the business side?
Well, yeah, going into the, we were having a rough time before the pandemic, as anybody involved in the news industry knows, and this has been going on for some time, and the pandemic just put us flat on our backs, and when advertising just disappeared. So this Western Iowa Journalism Foundation is basically kept us open during the pandemic. We got a payroll protection grant, and then we got a cash infusion from the Western Iowa Journalism Foundation a few months ago, and I'm not sure. In fact, I'm convinced that we probably wouldn't be open right now were it not for that. And then we've had an awfully good week here. Thanks to the documentary, we've been able to heighten our profile, and we've gotten some fairly significant gifts just in the last week. So I'm a lot more hopeful than I was a year ago, for sure. And it's given us a new lease on life, really, because I wasn't at all convinced that there was a way forward, and now I think maybe there is. Now that I've got enough oxygen, got my head above water, I can see that there are opportunities if we can change.
That's outstanding news. Congratulations on the grants, I know, and the gifts that I know, based on the 3 days of conversations we've had here, can be such a challenge for so many organizations. And so that's a huge accomplishment. And
I think every newspaper ought to have a documentary done about them. It sure helps.
Beth, where are you going next? Who's the next paper that you're going to feature? But I know this, one of the things we talked about previously is that you hope the documentary, which Annie mentioned is going to be on PBS in a few weeks, can be used as a tool for other papers and other organizations as well to raise awareness. And I was hoping you could tell us a bit about that. I know this audience of who are fundraisers themselves, there'll be great interest there.
Yeah. So we created the film And we really decided that we wanted the impact, the launch of the film and the release of the film to be as impactful as possible. So for example, we've been in about 40 film festivals, and we did a 15 city theatrical that launched in Storm Lake and went across Iowa and the Midwest. And almost every single place where we played, we partnered with local newspapers or journalists to have a local conversation. And there are two instances that really stand out for me. In Chicago, a woman named Sheila Solomon moderated our conversation to follow. And, we had this, great crowd, and she was talking about the work that they're doing on a local level, these different news organizations. Art, I don't know if you remember all the details, but them coming together, and nobody knew what they were doing, and she said, well, what are we doing wrong that you don't know that all these different news organizations have partnered together? We've been writing about it. We've been, time and again, why don't you know? And there were people who read these different papers. They didn't know that these papers had come together. And so that opportunity that Sheila could speak to her community and Chicago and the readership about, what they are doing correctly or effectively or ineffectively was really incredible. I'll just also say that we were at the Hamptons International Film Festival maybe 2 weeks ago, and the after screening Q&A was moderated by David Rattray, who is the editor of the East Hampton Star. And at a certain point, someone in the audience said, David, are issues around advertising and loss of advertising, is that something that you've seen? Are your subscription numbers low? And I basically could have walked off of stage and a whole other conversation could have ensued. And so that was so gratifying that, David could have this exchange with his readership and say, it's not unicorns and rainbows, and this is how we're struggling and why. And I guess I would say that, our hope is that these kinds of conversations continue. We got really lucky with Art on a couple of levels, but one of them is that he writes about the newspaper, the struggles they're having, their financial realities to the readership. So we were able to fold that into the film. And I think, I've talked about this a bunch. I think other newspapers aren't necessarily good at doing that, or they've got that like American thing where we say like everything's fine and then we're like falling apart. So I'll just say that, we were really lucky that Art was doing that within his community. And we're hoping that the film can really become a tool for other newspapers, news outlets, and other communities to help inspire subscriptions or ads or understanding between newspapers and their communities, or local philanthropy. So, these are all, that's the real goal with the film, certainly after broadcast, or that impact continues.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think there was a Pew study that came out a couple years ago that over 70% of people across the US think that their local news organizations are in decent financial health, and the lack of awareness of the challenges facing local news is a huge issue, and it's been heartening to see that discussion change. And I know, I guess for Art and Kyle, I'd be curious what the conversation has been like locally there, both in Storm Lake and across Iowa more broadly in response to the film, or just more generally in response to the challenges facing local news. Obviously, you've been so vocal about it.
Well, the response in Storm Lake has been people were, you never know, the prophet in your hometown thing, are they going to, for that, the Iowa PBS staged a really cool and almost corny red carpet thing at the Vista Theater in Storm Lake, where my brother John and I got our first jobs picking up popcorn boxes after Saturday matinees. So it was fantastic. And the hometown crowd was very proud of the movie because it reflected Storm Lake as it is. So the hometowners loved it. And they were looking at it more as a movie about Storm Lake than a movie about the dire circumstances of the Cullen brothers.
Yeah.
And elsewhere, especially in towns that have lost great newspapers, people were asking us, how can we get this back? You know, like one screening in Oxford, Ohio, Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, there's Oxford is a town of 20,000 people or so, and with a major university, Miami of Ohio, and there's no local newspaper. The college kids try to do what they can in their student paper, but there's no local newspaper there anymore, and which, you know, Beth and I kind of blew our minds. Youngstown, Ohio, that's what, 60,000 people, no local newspaper.
Yeah, that screening
Yeah.
was wild, where we literally had students asking Art, you know, what do we do? How do we support our community through our college newspaper? And it's like, wow, the responsibility that these teenagers and,
Yeah.
you know, kids in their early 20s were bearing. So that was.
But it
that
gives
was-
you hope too, that
Right.
they're, you know, ready to go out there and fill up news deserts, really.
I mean,
I want to go to a comment in the chat. George Rodriguez at Advanced Local made this point, and he made it similarly in the chat when we were watching the documentary earlier this week, that really a point that the film made beautifully, I'm just reading now, is that it's not the newspaper, but really commerce and industry suffering from consolidation in Storm Lake also, and how interconnected these phenomena are. And so it seems like his question is, has anyone seen policies that can protect similar communities? But it seems like, I imagine Youngstown, like you just mentioned, is suffering the same fate, in a sense that all these things are interconnected.
Well, yeah, especially in smaller rural communities. You know, I'm vaguely familiar with the economic issues affecting Youngstown, which is, you know, manufacturing heading south of the border. And certainly a lot of that has happened in rural Iowa, which is a manufacturing center. Not, you know, the number one industry is not agriculture, it's manufacturing in Iowa. And so deterioration in rural communities has gone pretty much ignored for the past 40 years since the farm crisis, and by both Democrats and Republicans. And it's coming home to roost now in you know, kind of a rapid deterioration of the rural infrastructure, to put, you know, to use a too-used word, but both the human and the physical infrastructure in rural America is falling to the wayside by neglect. And it's part of the reason, I believe, that people ended up storming the capitals in Minnesota, Michigan, and Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, what do you think the role local journalism can play then in helping reverse those tides, or even just to help shed light on the crisis as it's happening?
Well, what we can do is advocate for rural America, and which is what we try to do, you know, and advocate for our communities in Des Moines, which is our state capital, and Washington, D.C. to the extent we can, and try and get people's attention that, you know, this next farm bill could make or break the planet. It's very hard to get people interested in that. But if you're interested in eating, you should be aware that California is on fire, and we've got to approach the landscape completely differently than we have for the past 50 years. So that's what we're trying to do. Whether that breaks through is another question, with a media that's obsessed on whether Nancy Pelosi went to the bathroom with Jayapal, you know.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. And Mickey Morissette from Minnesota Women's Press just made a point in the comments that it looks like the Supporting Local Journalism Act is going to stay in the package, which is good news for
if it passes, and it might be out in 5 minutes too.
Right.
So
but for now it's good news. And Kyle, I would love to hear more. I know it's early days still for the foundation, really just getting launched this past year, but be curious to hear more about your plans about how you hope to support these newsrooms across the region, and what the goals are, and what the programming and support might look like.
Yeah. Well, to the point of what you were just talking about, we need to preserve these newsrooms as one of those staples in these small communities, like a bank or some other cornerstone, to give people a voice, and to build community identity, and to build that healthier community. So, I mean, we're designed to provide both quick assist grants, but also longer transformational funding. So, Art and the Storm Lake Times, they've seen promise with their digital subscriptions. And so there are ways that we can help with through philanthropy and other ways of revenue to find long-term viability for these newsrooms. We can get involved in succession planning. So there are a lot of different ways that we can help steer these newsrooms to a better future. And we've carved out this western half of the state as our region, but we're trying to take a very staged, deliberate approach, focusing on a handful of 4 counties to start with, and really to get up to operability first, and then to put more of this programming in place. So, we have, there are different ways that we can, again, we're infrastructural. There are some nonprofit entities out there that are more content focused, and kind of making up for the content that's no longer being produced. And we can do that through supporting areas of content, but in a more infrastructural way, not so much producing the content ourselves. So we're looking at all of that.
Yeah, I think that type of support is so important. And one of the things we've talked about a lot this week at the conference is project support, supporting specific stories might be sexy in a sense, and especially for funders looking to have great visual impact, but helping keep the lights on to make sure that the day-to-day type of coverage that is so important and really comes through in the movie is able to continue. That is critical as well, and it's nice to see more of that type of support coming along.
Yeah, and to keep transforming, you have to realize I think it's over a quarter of the newsrooms in our region we're talking about don't even have a web presence. So, just like not every small town can survive. I mean, not every newsroom is going to be viable for the future, but we have to figure out who can be, and where can we make a real difference, and how can we help build that bridge.
And I imagine could be startups, new entities as well, folks that are trying digital first. And I imagine it'll be some sort of mix. And this is a question also from George in the chat for Art related to this. He writes, to what extent do you think the digital version of the paper can maintain the glue that binds the community together? If costs force you to cease publishing the paper, do you think that a digital version can do the same, as we're talking about the need to innovate and the need to iterate to keep things going?
Yes, I do think a digital version can be that glue that binds the community if it's good enough. But we're spending all our money on the press, on printing right now, and it's very difficult to get the money to invest in digital technology and know-how. So that's where we're hoping that the Western Iowa Journalism Foundation can kind of help us vault forward and get us like I say, I understand how to set ink rollers on a Harris V15A press. I can lay a stripe like nobody, but I have no idea what TikTok is. And so we really need that sort of help to help us make the turn. And at the same time, we can't ignore print because I was on a screening in New Mexico where a publisher from the Arizona-New Mexico border covers a lot of Native American nations. And, there's no internet access out there. They're driving newspapers 5 hours to get to readers. And so we have to support them too in their existing model. We have to maintain our print edition for people my age and older who don't understand digital media. as I don't.
Well, you may not be on TikTok, Art, but you're pretty agile on Twitter.
Thanks, Kyle.
And I think that speaks also, we're talking about diversity in terms of age and different communities that way, but also in terms of language and race and ethnicity. There are all sorts of different communities, and no one news organization is going to be able to serve all of them. And it seems to me, seems like one of the exciting things about the foundation's approach. And some of what you're doing in Storm Lake as well is thinking about it, as we were talking earlier with Jim Brady from Knight Foundation this morning, an ecosystem approach that there needs to be partnerships and entities of that sort to make sure that all the gaps are filled in a sense.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed is that you can get a grant to go write a book in Mexico about, indigenous people and corn, but you can't get a grant for a reporter to cover the Buena Vista County Board of Supervisors, which is how we won a Pulitzer Prize, was by covering our local county commissioners. And in their long discussions about noxious weeds and, all that, back taxes. A Pulitzer Prize came out of that, but you can't get a grant to pay for that mundane reporting.
So we start a foundation instead.
Yes.
That's excellent.
I'd
Go
like
ahead, Beth.
I just also want to piggyback what was about the challenges about fundraising. It's funny that you would say that, Art, because very early on when we were developing the film, we went to someone who, she funds a lot of films, she's got a strong track record. And she was like, I need a real story here if I'm going to fund this film. I want Art to do his Pulitzer thing and go after Grassley or, go after Tyson's, what's a movie that's about local news? And, in some ways we got lucky with, I hate to say it, with COVID, that showed, the importance of local news in some ways. But, I just would say early on in our fundraising, we had that same experience. It just wasn't, she wanted some big investigative story. She wanted spotlight on the local level. But the issue is that, we were sort of saying, well, A, that's not what Art does. B, we're not about to tell Pulitzer Prize winner what kind of stories to do for our movie. And C, like we think there might be something else here. So anyway, we share similar challenges.
Yeah, that being said, Beth, you were there at a particularly newsy time throughout the duration of the movie at the beginning of the Iowa caucuses, which seemed like a million years ago now. I forgot half of those people ran for president. But what was it like being on the ground following the folks in the newsroom, both to the candidate forums and things like that, but also visiting schools and things like that, the much more day-to-day work?
Yeah, I can say the the caucuses, being on the ground for that was really incredible. And the more that there's conversation about let's get rid of the caucuses, I think that, like, I hope the film shows in part like how valuable they are, that you can have neighbors speaking to each other and collegially disagreeing. I think, unfortunately, in America right now, we've really lost that ability to speak to people who disagree with us politically. And so to see that ability to have that exchange and on the ground was really incredible. I think I also, there's a line that comes from Tom in the newsroom scene where he says, let's hear this. Like, let's hear what cable news is going to say about us. Mm-hmm. And, I think that opportunity to be on the ground, to see what was really going on, was such a lesson in some ways about what local news does and what cable news and the chase for ratings does. And we were witnessing that juxtaposition in real time, which was really fascinating.
Well, And I would just add, I mean, one of the many things I love about the documentary is that juxtaposition of showing, it swings right from Pete Buttigieg in Art's newsroom to the council race in tiny, tiny Alta, I think it is, right? And so it shows you that these are equally important. These are intertwined. And if Iowa, we love to be, first in the nation in the caucus process. And if you want a viable landscape for those retail politics to play out, you need to be concerned about these communities and these local people and their political races and everything else. And that ecosystem needs to be there if you want to have a ritual like the Iowa caucuses.
I would add that Iowa has the most number of newspapers per capita of any state in the country, and the highest literacy, at least it used to have the highest literacy rate. I think we still do. And that's a fairly good environment to vet presidential candidates. There's 289 newspapers in Iowa's 99 counties.
Yeah, it's terrific to see that there's still a robust press and playing that role of interviewing folks both on the national and the local level. I want to turn to another question in the chat from Mickey, and this is for Art. You have a son who looks to be well-trained about the job and succession. For those of us who are nearing retirement and want young and BIPOC successors to take an important editor-publisher job that doesn't pay well, any advice or thoughts on how to think about diversity in that?
What I do know is that there's a lot of young, eager people that we've been running into since this documentary's been rolling that really do have a vision and a capacity for journalism. And how we hook up those young, they used to have sweat equity deals where a publisher would hire a young person and work their brains out for 10 years and then give them the newspaper. That's how it used to work. And then chains came along and bid up. Now they own most of the community newspapers in Iowa, which is a shame. There's very few really independent newspapers left. And so it's difficult to figure out how to find those, how to match those people, just like beginning farmers, matching beginning farmers with experienced vested farmers. And I guess the only what we're trying to do in terms of diversity is grow our own, rather than try and hire somebody from the University of Texas Journalism School to come up and report on Storm Lake, to hire maybe Matthew Merrill Keene, who's featured in the movie at that Bernie Sanders rally. He's a senior at Vienna Vista University, and with the help of the Western Iowa Journalism, Kyle, we'd sure like to hire him. And so that's how we do it. We try to grow our own, whether through siring them, as in Tom, or training them in as we hope maybe Matt Marroquin, who's interning with us right now. And so, but I think that's really the future of local news, is having people who want to be vested in that community. And when you're training them to move up or out, as that used to be the philosophy, I don't know if it still is at Gannett, up or out. And that does not serve community journalism very well.
I know, I mean, the foundation, we definitely want to focus on this more, and this succession issue that you're talking about.
We already matched up one donor with an existing newspaper publisher who to do a succession deal, right, Kyle?
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see if that happens. But I think there might be a new wave of entrepreneurs who are willing to get into this space. As long as they're dedicated to the community, like Art says, those communities can be so much better connected to the world. And maybe they're with a partner who has another entirely different career, maybe with a remote job. There could be a lot of different models for it to work, as long as you have people who are dedicated to the community and want to live there and serve a local audience.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really beautiful things about local journalism is that the reporters live in the community. They're as invested in the schools as you are, for example, and you have to see them in the supermarket or other places around town. That changes the conversation. They seem like real people, not media figures necessarily. And I want to go to another question in the chat from Annie here at the Institute. Can you talk a little bit more about how you raise funds for the paper and also the foundation and how you are thinking about developing that over time? I know you started with the GoFundMe at the onset of the pandemic.
Yeah, well, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Kyle.
no, go ahead, Art.
Okay, well, so we started with we got the idea of the GoFundMe campaign from Doug Burns of Carroll Times-Herald. They got sued but with a frivolous libel lawsuit filed by a former police officer. And the legal bills nearly killed them. And so they appealed for help and raised $90,000, I think, in a GoFundMe campaign. And that helped defray their legal expenses from defending this dismissed lawsuit. And so that gave us the idea of, okay, it's finally time we go pass around the tin cup too. It's do or die. And so, you know, we raised 28,000. And then Doug and I, you know, we started sending out some emails and stuff, just from email lists that he had compiled, and started getting some money in that way. And then then we actually organized the foundation. And since then, it's been really fortuitous that the documentary is there, and we've been able to go around and talk about it. Yeah. And so I get to my hotel room in Detroit at midnight, and there's an email there saying that this computer whiz in California who'd made billions of dollars heard about us via the documentary and wanted to make sure that we stayed open through the pandemic. And he just laid it on us. Can you imagine getting that email at midnight in your hotel room, thinking that you might go broke? And then all of a sudden he just said, you know, there's going to be a tomorrow.
Yeah. And, you know, and we're less than a year into the foundation, and we've had some good success and a lot of grassroots fundraising so far, a few hundred donors, but we're also very focused on these big blocks of funding now and finding the partners around the nation, other institutions that can, you know, be great allies, and again, get us up to operability and to start putting big blocks of programming in place.
Are you thinking yet? Obviously, we're in a moment right now with the documentary. You're talking to us for the same reason, how to hopefully continue the momentum once this phase passes to continue sustainability for the long run.
Oh, yeah. Oh, do we? Yeah. Storm Lake is wonderful, and when people get to the end of that film, and I've seen this myself in screenings around Iowa, they naturally are asking, well, what do we do? What can we do? How can we help? And as Art was saying, I mean, that's been a gift to us in our early months. But yeah, we have to demonstrate that value over and over in other ways. So we won't always have you know, the finely crafted narrative here. You know, all the people we'll be encouraging people to watch this for many months to come. I assure you, even beyond the PBS broadcast. But we will have to demonstrate this value through our actions and through amplifying what we are able to do in newsrooms throughout Western Iowa.
And Beth, we have a question coming from Jim Friedlich here at the Institute in the chat. Can you tell us a bit about the idea of an impact producer and what they do for this documentary and other films as well?
Yes, so, you know, so I directed the film alongside Jerry Rishas and also produced the film. So I know how to make movies and get them out into the world. But that ability to kind of create a movement around a film is sort of a different skill set. And so that's what an impact producer does. And I'm incredibly fortunate. Some people on this Zoom call know her, but there's a woman named Alice Quinlan, based in Chicago, grew up in Iowa. And she is helping us to secure so many of the partnerships that we have, the national partnerships. So this partnership with you, Lenfest, with Report for America, with PEN America, with the American Journalism Project. So she is helping us to secure those partnerships, identify how the film can be used by those organizations and their members. And then she's helping to do everything, to help when I mentioned that we're having these at every festival that we were at, she's been really working to identify what's the local newspaper that we could partner with, who's the editor, who's the who's the lead reporter that could lead the Q&A or be part of the Q&A. So, the impact producer helps to create engagement and movement, and it's not just event-based, it's also around messaging. And I also just want to add, I'll get up and I'll take my computer with me, but like we even created these, postcards that we give out at every screening, and they say like ways that you can support local news. And we have this cool t-shirt campaign where if you scan the QR code, you can get a really cool t-shirt. And so, the impact producers help is also thinking about like, how do you reach and move audiences to get them to care? So it's both sort of administrative and partner building, but it's also momentum and engagement and ideally education building as well.
Yeah, it
Thank
sounds
you.
a lot
Thank
like,
you.
oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was just saying thank you. It sounds like a great role. I was just struck when I saw the credit at the end of the movie, impact producer. What the heck is that? And it produces impact. So thank you.
Yeah.
It sounds a lot like in the journalism world, an audience engagement or community engagement editor, and connecting folks with the work. And I think that relates to the question we have here from Matt Albertson at KUOW, I'm sorry. Are there any ideas for local news organizations to fundraise around the wider distribution of the documentary, or how can other folks potentially get involved if they want to support a screening or something else around the film? Would Alice be the person to get in touch with?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, stormlakemovie.com, there's a section called screenings, and actually there's a form to request a screening, and we have like kind of corporate rates for like a bigger entities, let's say, but for small newspapers, we felt like it was really important that they be able to host screenings, so we drastically reduced the rates for screenings. And also consider there's actually a window now in this month actually where we created an hour-long, well, we had to, PBS needed us to create an hour-long cut down of the film, and between now and November 29th, we are offering to organizations free screenings of that film. They're virtual screenings, but to raise issues within communities. So we're trying to make the film available to newspapers, organizations, and even journalism and civics programs as widely as we possibly can.
Excellent. I think, I can't recommend it enough in terms of it. The process was very easy in terms of setting up the screening, and the platform was very easy. So definitely encourage you to do that. And I think it's so interesting to hear these conversations around local news expand to broader audiences. We live very much in this journalism bubble, and this is what I talk about all the time, but to hear folks who aren't in this space have these conversations, it's a nice change of pace, and I think important to help broaden the discussion and really tie the importance of local news to democracy and civics and civic engagement, all the things we all care about. So for all of you, I guess, what's next now that the film is out, the screening is coming to PBS? Where are you hoping to go next? Kyle with the foundation, Art with the paper. Where do you go from here?
Well, I mean, I'll say that, again, we're just now getting to the point of being able to be fully funded in terms of having a full-time executive director. You know, she's been working largely volunteer and on, part-time funding. So we want to get up to full speed as much as possible, and then start to really implement a lot of these things we've been talking about. More fully funding newsrooms in these 4 counties, which is a part of our first phase. Working on succession planning and some of our other objectives. So I think with the tailwind that we can have from November and from Storm Lake and from our early months of work, we want to be able to better prove out this concept and connect with these big block funding allies nationwide.
Yeah, and I'd say that I think what we need to do is embark on is to raise funds to build a new digital infrastructure that can service and to grow reader revenue, because I'm not convinced that we'll be able to be raising funds on a perennial basis. The ultimate answer, I believe, is selling information to readers, and we have to be able to do that digitally, and we currently aren't able to do it, and it's just because we're starved for cash. We just don't have any capital, and if we did, we could make a huge difference, I think, in reader revenue.
Yeah, I think that is going to be the key for so many news organizations around the country. It's a mix of revenue, it's direct reader revenue, and philanthropy is certainly a big part of that, and a key, hopefully a component moving forward for local news organizations of all stripes, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, legacy, or startup. Well, anyone here have any last questions or things they want to add before we wrap up? We just have a few minutes left, and if anyone wanted to jump in, now's the time before we wrap up.
I'll just say I highly recommend the film. I think it's fantastic, and it would be really interesting if, per one of the comments in the chat, we could galvanize some national fundraising coordinated campaign around some of the, maybe around the PBS screening of the film. I'd love to have an opportunity to screen it to our donors, actually, so that they can see firsthand what's going on in Iowa and in local news across the country. I think they would really enjoy it. So we'll be reaching out to see if we might be able to do that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, we'd love that. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I want to be mindful of the time as we approach 5 o'clock, 4:30 Eastern time. This was a wonderful way to spend a Friday afternoon. I personally can't think of a nicer way to spend the day. So thank you very much for a wonderful discussion and an amazing film, and for bringing the story to so many people across the country. I think only with films like Storm Lake will people start to understand the real challenges facing local news. So we are all grateful to you for that. To our audience, we hope that you've enjoyed the summit and all of the wonderful presentations, discussions, and workshops. We are going to send you a short survey and hope that you'll tell us what you liked and how we can improve it for next time. And please complete our very, very, very short and fast survey on fundraising. We want to set a sort of a foundation baseline for how much money we're all raising now. And maybe 5 years from now, we will have tripled or quadrupled that fundraising, and that would be a great benchmark to reach. If you'd like more programming on fundraising, and this applies to Kyle and Art and anyone else that you know is raising money for local news, on Monday, we'll host our next News Philanthropy News workshop with the News Revenue Hub and Newsmatch at INN, with last-minute tips and tricks for writing year-end fundraising solicitation emails. The workshop is free, as all of our workshops and presentations and programs are, and open to everyone. So that'll be on Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So again, thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you for a wonderful Friday afternoon to all of you, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon. Take care.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you so
Art.
much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
All the best to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Keep up the great work.